What's up, SDS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in true crime. And when the chief technical officer leaves for just a few moments, aka my wife, all hell breaks loose. So we're trying to work on getting some connectivity here. I think I've got Wendy Murphy in the house. Wendy, you're hearing me?
I hear you.
Ah, I love it. Look at that. I can do it all myself. The chief technical officer is now fired. It is week 4 of the Lori Vallow Daybell trial. Of course, it is the trial of the so-called doomsday mom, the wildly twisted story of a seemingly loving mother, a self-proclaimed devout member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who clearly veered way off course as she went down that slippery path to Demonville. And became involved in the deaths of as many as 5 people, including her own children. You are in for a treat tonight. Best guests. The man who looks like a statesman is a statesman. He is the Florida State Attorney for Palm Beach County. He is also a former member of the Florida Senate. His name is Dave Aronberg. He was elected to the Senate in 2002 as its youngest member back then and served for 8 years. He's a graduate of Harvard, both undergrad and Harvard Law School, like Dan Markel, who we've focused on this podcast. He's a friend of Dan Markel, and he's also a very proud Miami Heat fan, tweeting out that they're the first play-in team to win the first round of the playoffs. Look at that smile. And then someone with I don't know, potentially more brain power, if that's possible, than Dave Aronberg is Wendy Murphy. She serves as adjunct professor of sexual violence law at New England Law in Boston, where she also co-directs the Women's and Children's Advocacy Project under the Center for Law and Social Responsibility. She's a former visiting scholar at Harvard Law School. So Dave went there, but Wendy taught there. Not trying to set up a fight here. Wendy prosecuted child abuse and sex crimes for many, many years, and you saw her all over cable TV, and you still do occasionally. Tara Malik is a Boise, Idaho licensed attorney practicing in state and federal court in business and commercial litigation. She has experience in both civil and criminal law, and I told Dave he better watch out because Tara is going to take all his TV punditry away because they are coming for Tara. John Delatorre is the master of the mind. He is a licensed psychologist based in Texas, Arizona, and New York State, and does a ton of TV as well. He is a certified traumatologist. Without further ado, Dave Aronberg only has a short time with us, like a half hour, which isn't that short for Dave. So we appreciate his time. But Dave, I saw a tweet, and this is something that's been part of the conversation around this trial since its get-go, and that is regarding New York State, where your pal Donald Trump from your county was indicted recently. You said there need to be cameras in courtrooms. It's 2023. There needs to be transparency. Judge Stephen Boyce decided no cameras in Boise, Idaho. What's the deal with this? And should there be transparency since it is a public court?
Yeah, it's good to be with you, Joel, and to this auspicious panel. I don't know why we don't require cameras in the courtroom. I mean, look, the criminal justice process is already shrouded in secrecy enough. The grand jury process is entirely secret. You have pending investigations that we're not allowed to talk about. And now to add to it, you're going to say to particularly high-profile cases that, nope, the public, you can't see what's going on. We'll tell you about the verdict afterwards. And yeah, maybe you'll get to see a sketch artist like we're back in 1965 or something. So I think that we need to move into the modern era, to digital era, to connected era, and put cameras in the courtroom. What are we scared of? And, you know, the first place to start, how about the Supreme Court? I think that would actually do something to finally improve the reputation of the high court in the land.
And, you know, that's a great point because obviously they're the most powerful part of the judiciary in America, and I know so little about it. You know, I feel like I personally know so little about it because I never see anything. Wendy Murphy, do you agree with Dave Aronberg? You're a no-nonsense woman. What's your take on this?
Yeah, you bet I do. I wrote in my first book back in, I think it was 07, whatever year it came out, that there should be C-SPAN for courts. There should be a constant, line of some sort. Not that we all have to watch at all times, but we can if we want to. It's not only a public place where we're spending public dollars doing the public's business, but especially in criminal cases. I mean, that is the quintessential business of the public, because crime is always the public's concern. And we're taking people's liberty away. So even from the perspective of the accused, you want the shiniest light to be shining on everything. Because if someone loses their liberty, and they shouldn't, or the government doesn't behave well, or for that matter, if the defense attorney doesn't behave well and somebody loses their liberty because the lawyer did a terrible job, we all need to provide a degree of accountability for that. That's the whole point of having the public oversight baked into a democracy. So you can't do that without cameras. Thankfully, we have technology today that we didn't have hundreds of years ago. So we have the ability to respect the constitutional interests more today than ever before. And yet it almost seems sinister the way some courts tie our hands. You're in court sometimes and, if the judge even sees someone on their phone, even if you're trying as a journalist, for example, to report on something, they'll confiscate your phone and slap your hand. I think the Supreme Court in particular is doing the public's business at a level that is more important than anything else any court does ever. That should always be available both by video and audio. But God bless COVID, because that forced the court's hand, right? And I was delighted to be sitting in my pajamas in my kitchen every day, clicking on the link and listening to Supreme Court arguments. I just loved it. I reveled in it. And they're still allowing that kind of access. So, I mean, I think we're moving in the right direction. But when it shouldn't matter that it's a high profile case, is my bottom line. There should be public access in low profile, high profile, and everything in the middle, because that is the place where the public's interest is its strongest, if you ask me.
And it's interesting you said about slapping the hand. We have a guest on named Lori Hellis. They call her Good Lori as opposed to Bad Lori Vallow. And she's writing a book on the case. And she's a retired criminal defense attorney. And she wrote a few motions and presented them to Judge Boyce. And lo and behold, once the trial started just a couple of days ago, they thought, and she didn't because the bailiff took her phone, that she took a picture, but they still removed her from court, and people thought it was a vindictive move. So there you go, Wendy, to your point. Lisa Rumsey says, this case is a wild ride. I can't wait to see what's at the next turn. Thank you, Joel, and best guest. Followed here by from Ketchup, a fan of the show, sending love and prayers to Kay and Larry Woodcock, who are in court today. Colby Ryan and the rest of the families. Justice will prevail. Hello, STS Nation and best guest. By the way, Tammy Daybell's sister is expected to take the stand right about now. The court's set to go for about, actually, she could be on the stand now, but court will adjourn shortly. They're actually adjourning early today. I'm going to be a little Dave heavy in the first 20 minutes because that's pretty much what he can give us. So, Dave, there was a phone call played in court between Summer Shiflett, Lori Vallow's youngest sister, and Lori about this happened, once the kids were found, but no one knew, Lori's responsibility or not responsibility in it. And she says, Summer asked Lori if she knew they were there. Lori says, I can't talk about it. Summer says she doesn't know what to say. And the kids were thrown away like garbage, she says to Lori. It's too painful. Lori quietly responds on this jailhouse call, do you think I let that happen? Summer responds, yes, I do. You went off to Hawaii and you were dancing on the beach as the kids were in the ground. I don't understand. They were just little kids. I don't understand. Was that the nail, in your opinion, in the proverbial coffin there for Lori Vallow, just to hear that call in the courtroom?
There are a lot of nails in this coffin. The evidence is, even though it's circumstantial, it's pretty devastating for Lori Vallow. And I don't think you do it justice by just reading the transcript. You actually have to hear it and hear that phone call where her sister Summer is screaming is hysterical. And that's how any mother should be when something like this goes on. And then you contrast it to Lori Vallow's chill demeanor, nonplussed, hardly even reacts, even though her kids have been missing and now are found dead in her man's backyard. So what, right? That's the reaction. There's not a single parent on that jury that's not going to react in horror by the way that Lori Vallow reacted on that call.
And Dr. John De La Torre, we've had conversations back and forth, and people get kind of inflamed about it, about whether Lori Vallow is quote unquote smart or not. Because people associate smart in the affirmative as a positive. I got a message from Maureen Casey, a member of STS Nation, and she wrote in response to us discussing this the other day, I think Lori is cunning and manipulative. Smart implies that you are empathetic and compassionate, and certainly that you have an understanding of the world that is reasonable. Lori is not smart. Lori is cunning, like as in a predator. Do you agree with this assessment? And is she smart or not?
I think I need at least 5 days to describe whether or not someone is smart. The issue becomes, how are we defining smart, right? How are we defining intelligence? Because first of all, intelligence doesn't determine what you will do. It only determines how well you're able to do it. So it is certainly possible for someone to be intelligent and not motivated to commit crime. But it's also possible that someone can be unintelligent and highly motivated to commit crime. Is she smart? I don't know that smart necessarily includes empathy. I don't know that to be true. It's certainly one aspect of intelligence could include that. Is she cunning? I think she is targeted. And what I mean by that is I think she picks the individuals that she can manipulate and coerce. I believe she has that ability to do so, but I also think that she's susceptible to coercion and manipulation. So I think in some ways it's kind of a feedback loop that she finds herself in. She finds someone that she can latch onto. That person gives her what she needs and she gives it right back. And they become siloed so that no one else can infiltrate that thing. So they're only speaking to each other in a language that they understand.
Wendy, I know you have thoughts on this. I'd love for you to weigh in. And also just kind of your bird's eye view of this insanely insane case and this trial that we're witnessing right now. Oh, hold on. I have you on mute. I'm sorry. You are good to go.
Okay. Well, you might be surprised by what I say about my bird's eye view, but let me just say first, as a non-psychologist observer of human behavior, I have no problem seeing women as capable of doing very evil things. I don't have that kind of bias about, women never hurt their children and men sometimes do. I think men do more than women, but women have the capacity. Or as, a very well-known psychologist said many moons ago about a friend of mine who was horrifically sexually abused by her grandfather, and she wanted to know why her mother didn't protect her. And he said, well, just because she gave birth to you doesn't mean she likes you. And I remember when she told me that, I thought, oh my God, that's the most awful thing I've ever heard. But it was also very liberating to her because it meant she no longer had to expect her mother to protect her, and it, gave her some other options. But I mention that only because I do think these cases are hard for jurors who will be predisposed to believe a mother isn't going to hurt a child. And that's a benefit to her. That's a benefit to the defendant in this case. As for where I see the evidence, I've only followed this case the way most people have, reading stories. I don't have firsthand access to the evidence, but I think this is a tough prosecution case because I don't think there's enough there to connect the dots. There's a lot of smoke. Certainly she's weird. I will go that far. And she said and did some hateful things. But it's also possible that someone else killed the kids and set her up. And I think that might be what the defense ends up suggesting. Or they're just going to say, there's no proof beyond reasonable doubt, which is a strategy. I don't see the sufficiency of the case at this point. I could be proved wrong. But this case is weird. There's so much that's weird about this case. The people involved, and I mean not just Lori, but virtually everyone she was connected to, there's weirdness everywhere. And for that reason, I think she's going to have a lot of opportunity to push blame elsewhere and say, you know, maybe this person didn't kill, but look at this nightmare world we were all living in. Whether that translates into a not guilty remains to be seen. But I said Casey Anthony would be found not guilty for the same reasons. So I think this case is somewhat similar to me. And I don't mean, you know, in the fact pattern per se, I mean the lack of heft in the evidence.
Do you flat out, you think she's going to get acquitted then?
Well, no, I'm not saying she will, because I still want to hear the rest of the evidence. But I'm saying she absolutely could, based on what I know. And I don't know everything, but based on what I know, as much as I want to wring her neck and I dislike her and I have all those same emotional feelings that everyone else has, objectively, I don't see the evidence yet that she killed anybody.
Tara, I promise we're coming to you, but Dave Aronberg is once in every few months get for us, and I'd love to get his perspective. Do you agree, I mean, Dave, with what Wendy just said, because that has also kind of been the rub, that it's all circumstantial, no real direct links, you know, connecting her to the actual, you know, premeditation and the murder, but conspiracy is a charge as well. Is there enough, in your opinion, right now, that we will see a conviction, or do you agree with Wendy that there's just smoke but no fire right now?
Well, first off, I'm excited to hear what Tara has to say, because it's the buildup, it's the anticipation that's the key here. It's going to be great. Now, and far from me to disagree with law professor and Wendy, but I do think that there's enough circumstantial evidence. The fact that she encouraged her best friend to lie about the whereabouts of the children. Look, if this was about Lori actually pulling the trigger or killing the kids themselves, yeah, that's a tough one. There is no evidence that she's the one who did it herself, but it's a conspiracy case. You need to have a meeting of the minds and an overt act. And the overt act doesn't have to be from Lori. It could be from the co-conspirator, the gravedigger. Yeah, Chad. He was a gravedigger before he became a doomsday cult leader. And that grave digging came in handy when he dug the graves, and possibly the help of Alex Cox, to bury the kids. But getting back to Lori, I do think there's enough. I think the circumstantial evidence is enough because it's a conspiracy case, not because she has to be proven to do it herself. And ultimately, you know, when your kids are missing, and then what do? You lie about it. I think the best defense for Lori would have been if she points a finger at Chad as the killer, and she was brought along she didn't want to. He had her under control. She's a damsel in distress. That would have been a good defense, but she is so in love with the gravedigger that she doesn't want to sell him out. Well, guess what? His trial comes next, and you can bet he's going to point the finger at Lori, because Lori's going down for this, and then he's going to shove it all on Lori. I think Lori may think that, you know, she'll even get to continue her relationship with Chad in the next life, but it ain't going to happen.
Dave, are you surprised? Because I thought, and I'm no attorney and I'm no scholar, I'm just an ex-TV news guy, but I thought from the get-go that the defense was just going to blame it all on the dead brother, on Alex Cox, who seemed to be everywhere. But it doesn't seem like they've really done that. Is that surprising at all, that wasn't a strategy?
Yeah, you know, that is another possibility to sit, but in a way, because look, they're all part of that conspiracy. And so if Alex Cox does it, you're still guilty because if you're part of the conspiracy, but you know, he's not there to tell tales. He's dead. And it would have been, I think, a better defense than the one she has now, which is, according to her lawyer, well, she's part of this religious cult. Don't discriminate against her and don't judge her. And we'll find out the rest of it later. But in the meantime, the state has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. Wendy mentioned it. It may be a reasonable doubt, a burden of proof defense, which is typical for defense lawyers, but they had a better defense. And that would have been point the finger at Chad, point the finger at Alex. They've done really neither.
And now on, the anticipation has ended. We have arrived at Tara Malik, everyone, who just ran a 10K, by the way. So that's impressive, because I could run a 1K with my torn meniscus at the moment. Tara, there was a tweet sent to me and says, hey, guys, I was asking if there's going to be a conviction now because of all this testimony, grisly testimony that we heard. But this person says, in my opinion, the defense was arguing that these crime scene photos and the autopsy photos, the defense was arguing them to be prejudicial because it would show how evil Lori is, whether or not directly involved in the murders. They knew this was her children's fate and then proceeded to dance on the beaches of Hawaii, the tweet goes on to say. But what about the fact, is there an argument to be made that these pictures were, in fact, I don't know, prejudicial to the jury? And is that a typical argument the defense would make?
Well, the argument that was actually made was that they were cumulative and prejudicial. So there's two parts to that. The cumulative nature of the photographs are basically like the evidence is already in. We've had the witnesses describe it. There's no need to present 30 photographs, of the same thing or the same crime scene. So that was one of the objections to the admission of those photographs that was raised. And then the other was their prejudicial nature. And the basis for that obviously is that, they're so grisly. So yes, those are legitimate objections that can be made. But in a case like this, where the state has a very high burden, they have the burden of laying the proper foundation to get evidence admitted. They have a number of experts who are going to be testifying in this case and providing conclusions and their opinions in this case. And in order to do that, they have to brick by brick lay the foundation for those opinions. So if they're talking about, what they observed and what they saw and how they saw it and where it was, they're going to be admitting those types of, or those pieces of evidence to support their opinions and also to show that they were thorough here.
Good point. Laura Waldy writes, "Hi, Joel, best guest in SCS Nation. Wow, another day of rough testimony. Dr. John Delatorre, is counseling offered to jurors who have to listen to such horrible testimony we can get in most places in Canada, which is, I presume, where she lives. But, John, what about the fact that, these are regular people like you and I, and they're sitting here and they're witness to really graphic stuff that could haunt them. I have a detective on every Friday, Phil Waters, legendary homicide detective. He says the one thing that gets to him are the pictures of the kids. That's what he thinks about. So what about this? Will they get help? Will they need help, do you think?
Will they need help? I think that depends on the coping resources that each individual juror has. Will they get help? No, they won't get help. But do they need it? I think if you're the kind of person in which that those kinds of pictures were going to impact you to such a degree that you were going to need counseling after that, I think the attorneys probably would have picked that up in voir dire. I think individuals who would have made a decision based only on pictures like that, I think there are ways in which you could screen those individuals out and they wouldn't have been on the jury to begin with. But just thinking about just a regular individual being on a jury, not knowing what case that they're going to be on until the case starts, and then seeing all that stuff, I can weigh heavily on you for the duration of the case and maybe for a little bit after. But I think for the most part, I think most of them are going to be okay following a conclusion because they'll have this feeling that they've engaged in justice. Right, that they've spoken for the victims in this case. And I think that goes a long way of solidifying the coping resources necessary to deal with the evidence presented in the case.
Dave, to you, since I know your time is running thin here, Mabel Quintanilla, friend of the show. She watches us from El Salvador. Question for the lawyers, for State Attorney Dave Aronberg. How does this trial and evidence help Chad's trial and the possibility of having a better defense strategy? Does it?
It's better for Chad that he bats last, meaning that he's going later. He's going to watch Lori. Lori is going to stay loyal to Chad, and Chad can double cross her and just put it all on her, especially after she's convicted of this crime. So I think it definitely helps Chad in that way. But some of the evidence that's coming out, Lori talking about how these kids are demons and demons need to be killed, something of that sort, zombies, and zombies need to be killed. That could help Chad point the finger at, look, that's it. She said that. She's the one who killed him. So there are some things that are coming out that are really bad for Lori that could help Chad if he plays it right. But I think both of them are going down for this. Remember, it's a conspiracy. It doesn't matter who's the one who actually did the killing, as long as it was an overt act. And there are plenty of overt acts here. So I do think definitely Chad benefited. The state wanted to combine the two, and I believe it was separated, and I think definitely benefits the one who goes last.
And Dave, back to you. We have had Lori Hellis. She's a courtroom observer. Again, she's writing a book about this case. This trial was supposed to last 8 weeks, but she predicted we could hear closing arguments as soon as Monday. Would you be surprised that it would be this fast-tracked? And also, I guess the adjoining question would be, does that mean the defense has no defense? Do you think they're going to call witnesses?
Yeah, I don't. Well, the big question is, will Lori take a stand? I think that'll be a negative. As far as anyone else, I don't know who they're going to call. So I think it'll be a quick defense. I think, as Wendy had said, that it's going to be a burden of proof case. Did the state prove its burden of proof in a circumstantial case? And so I think it will go quicker than people anticipated. Another thing against Lori, to go back to the last question, is that Lori looked up the insurance policies. She was trying to monetize the death of her kids, and that also goes to her motive, circumstantial evidence. Remember, the lawyer for the state, the prosecutor, said this was about money, power, sex. Yeah, so there's a reason why she added money and power in there. It's because there's a financial incentive here too. So there's a lot of circumstantial evidence, not a lot of direct evidence, but I think in the end there's enough to find her guilty.
And Tara, I mean, same question to you. Does the defense have a defense of any kind here? Do you think they call witnesses? And would you be surprised if this ends as soon as next week?
I would be surprised. I don't know about Monday. That seems awfully quick. Just looking at today's play-by-play on what was going on and what testimony was put on, I think they are moving quicker than people had anticipated and the parties had anticipated at the outset. As far as the case overall, I mean, that the state has the burden. It's a really high burden. This is not a more likely than not 51%. I think it is a really high burden here. I think that the defense is going to do what good defense teams do, is point out that high burden and say they simply haven't met it. And in a circumstantial case, it can be difficult. Now, circumstantial evidence is still good evidence. And when you look cumulatively here, I think there's a whole lot that, raises a lot of eyebrows and certainly calls into question Lori's credibility, all the lies that she's been told along the way. So, I think the state has a decent case here, and yet to be seen what this jury will do with it. I've certainly had cases where I thought, of course, this is going to be, we're going to get a guilty out of it, and you go in and it's not guilty, and vice versa. So hard to predict what a jury will do, but so far I think the state has done a pretty good job.
And Wendy, to you from Cynthia Guarri. Oh, go ahead, Wendy.
Well, I just wanted to say, in terms of the length of the case, that if it moves really quickly from the defense perspective, that seems to me they have confidence that they don't mind that it ends quickly because they think the state didn't make its burden. Especially in high profile cases, you tend to see the defense drag things out for months if they can, because those days that pass are just, every single day is a greater chance of a not guilty. The longer you can drag things out, it builds distance from the initial emotional impact of the prosecution's case. It muddies water. I mean, if the case ends fast, to me, that's a sign the defense thinks they're going to win. It's an observation, not a guarantee, but it's an indication how they feel, not how I feel. And just one very quick thing about jurors being traumatized. As a former prosecutor, I mean, the gruesome nature of the cases that I handle, because I specialized in child abuse and sex crimes, and I also prosecuted homicides. I remember we were picking a jury in a case where the killer, this was for a murder case, and the killer had been in jail before. So when he got out and he was going to go do a hit for somebody in prison, he had a rusty gun and he wanted to test it to see if it would work before he went to do the killing. So he tested it on a cat. And when we were picking the jury, the judge said, does anybody have any concerns about being involved in a case where a cat is shot? And no one raised their hand. And then the defense attorney started making noises and said, sidebar, sidebar. And we all go up to sidebar. And the judge said, nobody raised their hand. What's your problem? He said, I think we should check the second row. And court officer went back, and sure enough, a woman fainted. She fainted in the second row of where the jurors were. And he eventually brought her up to sidebar and said, "Ma'am, did you respond to the question about the shooting of a cat?" And she's sobbing, out of control, sobbing. "I can't believe anyone would kill a cat." And we're looking at each other like, this is actually about the shooting of a human. But she had no problem with the shooting of the human. So I think it's true that jurors who are too emotional to handle these kinds of cases absolutely make it clear to the judge from the get-go, don't pick me. Not only am I going to be very upset and end up in a mental hospital, I'm going to be a terrible juror because I can't be unbiased. So I think that's, probably fair to say we don't have problematic jurors in that regard. They will be affected. They will never unsee those photographs. That will be with them for life. But, that's part of our job as people who serve as jurors. We have to accept the stress that comes with making judgments in these sorts of cases. The only other thing I want to say, which I know these two cases were together for a long time on their track toward trial. And now that they're separated, I think a benefit to Lori is that she gets to go like this, to her husband, because this is true in the Ramsey case as well. If you wanted to prosecute Patsy Ramsey, she would blame John. If you wanted to prosecute John, he'd blame Patsy. That cross-finger pointing problem is the most horrific case for a prosecutor because you can't stop them from working together to guarantee each other's reasonable doubt. You blame me, I'll blame you, we both walk. That's a problem for prosecutors in cases like this. And I think because they're separated, it's an even bigger problem for prosecutors. Yes, the guy who goes second might benefit from watching the case and see what worked and didn't work. But the cross-finger pointing problem is a benefit to both of them.
Joel, just one thing to add on that. I agree. That's why I think she's leaving money on the table. She is not doing that as much as she probably should. I think she's doing it because she thinks she's still going to end up with Chad, live happily ever after in this life or the next one.
Yeah. And by the way, I was going to say, sorry, Wendy, go ahead, Wendy. I had me. Go ahead.
And in cases like this, they can let each other blame each other. They agree. Their lawyers talk to each other and they allow each other to blame each other. It's a strategy. So they don't get upset. They don't say, "Oh, Lori's such a jerk. She pointed the finger at me." They say, "Pick me. I'll be your plan B suspect." And then we'll go off into the sunset. It's a strategy and it's brilliant. And it works in cases like this better than most people understand. So I think it's too bad that they have a conspiracy charge in a case where the conspirators are separated. I'm not sure why that happened.
By the way, as a devout dog guy, I can sort of relate to the woman about her cat, but that's another story. Dave, two final questions for you because I know you got to roll. This question here from Cynthia. I think Chad's attorney is watching. His name is John Pryor. He's been in court in order to avoid the pitfalls and also throw Lori Alex under the bus. This goes to exactly what Wendy was just saying. If you're John Pryor, and I know you're a prosecutor, but if you're on the other side and you're defending Chad Daybell, what are you looking for in court right now? What are you doing to bolster your upcoming defense?
Yeah, well, first, Cynthia's dog's adorable. I'm a fellow dog person. And, I probably would have reacted the same way. I try the animal cruelty cases myself in this office because of that. As I said earlier, Chad's lawyer, they're going to point the finger at Lori. I think it's going to happen, and they're going to use the statements that Lori made, that's the evidence that came out, searching for the insurance, saying that the kids are zombies and zombies need to be killed, the lies, all that stuff. Look, she did it. She did it. Maybe I helped dispose of the bodies, but that's a lesser crime. I wasn't part of any conspiracy and so forth. So I think that's where they're headed. And as far as your second question, my friend?
Second question, I'm going to read you something real quick here. This is from Lori Vallow's cousin. Her name is Christy Lott, and she says about the trial, "We are getting our answers, and we're getting to see that Lori is a totally different person. It's hard because we love her, but I feel like I'm saying goodbye to her. I don't have to think about her anymore. It's like a funeral for Lori." I think it's always important, obviously. True crime, people get hyped up. This is really always about the victims. Is there, in some strange way, does a trial offer some sort of closure? We don't know the verdict yet, but, the cousin is saying it's a way for them to say goodbye and sort of move forward. Just curious about, from a human standpoint, your thoughts on this.
Yeah. And Lori is a different person now than she was earlier when the grandparents wanted her to adopt JJ. I mean, she was a loving mom until she wasn't. So that's it's a way to say goodbye to the Lori they knew. It's a way to have some closure and to really to sort of compartmentalize it, that the Lori they knew is different than the Lori that you saw here, and now she's gone forever. I mean, you saw that, I think, in the Murdaugh case, where you had the loyal son Buster there, and in the end he had to watch as his father was found guilty of murdering his brother and his mom. And so you got to believe that perhaps that had something, maybe that changed his view of his father, or maybe not. But yeah, I think it's a good point. It is a part of a closure. It's like the one chapter closes, another one opens.
David,
so, Joel, thank you for having me. I'm sorry that I had to leave early, but this has been a great podcast.
Thank you so much. Real quick, I have one comment left for you after this one. After Casey Anthony and O.J. Simpson, anything is possible, followed by the Jersey girl, Jennifer Castaldi. Welcome, Dave, Miami Heat fan here too.
You know what? I just to make a statement. What we have been witnessing is greatness. Jimmy Butler, they should retire his jersey right now. Hall of Fame. Love the guy. Watch out, New York Knicks.
I got to root for the Knicks, Dave. I'm a Jersey guy. Still love you. Thank you for coming on. Appreciate it. We'll have you back soon.
Thanks for having me. Good to be with you.
All right. So now that the state attorney is gone, we can have a little more equity here. I apologize. So I'm curious, John Della Torre, about this interview from the first cousin kind of, caught me. I thought it was very emotional and very moving. Again, her name is Christy Lott, the first cousin. She said after seeing the autopsies of JJ and Tylee, she thought it was horrific, but did bring her some closure. And she went on to say, I'm really glad they didn't show those pictures to the public. People should not have to see them. I wanted to do it. I wanted to be there to see it for sure, that it was them and they're gone. You would do that at a funeral. You want to say goodbye to a body. And I don't know if we will get that chance anytime soon. I mean, how do you respond to that? I mean, I don't want to, you're a certified traumatologist. Are these people traumatized? Are they trying to heal themselves here? Can it be done, especially after seeing these photographs that Wendy said will, she believes, stay with them for life?
Oh, yeah. But how that healing happens and how you define it is completely up to the individual. So thinking about, there's a feeling that there's a compulsion that I had to see these photos, but you, the audience, right? You, the public, don't need to see these. I take it upon myself because it's a cross that I need to bear for myself. So in that way, then it's certainly possible then that she views healing and she views trauma as a way that, as something that can easily be incorporated into her sense of being. And that's the key right there. A lot of people don't want to incorporate the negative events that have occurred in our lives. They want to compartmentalize it. They want to separate it. But the reality is in order for us to be whole, we have to take all the good and all of the bad. And so if we stop viewing it as a negative, if we start viewing it as a way for us to grow in some fashion, however you want to define that, but using it as post-traumatic growth rather than post-traumatic stress, you'll find it a lot easier then to incorporate all that stuff. And hopefully she has some guidance with, a therapist, counselor, whatever it is that she thinks that she needs. Spiritual counseling, absolutely. Or maybe just getting out and meditating in nature. Maybe that's all she needs. Whatever it is, however she defines it, however you define it, however anybody defines it is absolutely normal. And you should do those kinds of things in order for yourself, not for anybody else.
I love the way Dr. Della Torre breaks things down. CJ Drake, what a great panel, followed by great panel. Look at you guys. Followed by what an awesome panel. You really do have the best guests. It is not just a tagline. It is our reality. Tara, to you. So Chad has a status conference coming up May 4th. Can you just kind of, for non-lawyers, what should we expect from that when it does happen?
So a status conference is used by a court and the parties as a check-in. And so a number of things can happen at a status conference. Sometimes the court is checking in on the timelines and just making sure that everyone's going to be ready to go for a trial. Sometimes the status conference is to figure out whether or not the parties are going to have some extensive motion practice. And so they need time set aside for that. So really, it's just kind of checking back into the case once the case has kind of sat there, not really dormant, but for the most part dormant as far as what's been happening in court, and figure out, okay, are we on the right track here? Do we need any extra time? Do we need to set aside some, particular time for motion practice, oral argument, so on and so forth prior to the trial?
Let me make sure I unmute Wendy here. Wendy, Wendy's autopsy photos were being shown. There was an exchange between Jim Thomas, one of the defense attorneys, and the medical examiner. And he said something to the effect of, "I'm just going off of things I've seen in movies and whatnot." And the medical examiner responds and says in court, "That's scary." There's been some questions about this defense. The lead counsel said in an interview when asked about the trial, he said, "I hope no one in Rexburg is watching it because it's not that interesting." They've really kind of not only sort of brushed it off, but they've been, I guess, lackluster, disinterested. How concerning is that to you?
Well, I'm not sure it's concerning as much as tactical. I mean, I just assume everything defense attorneys do when it comes to the press and the statements they make in court and so forth are strategic. And if they're not, it's anyone's guess why they're saying things that seem to make no sense. I just will assume that what they're doing is designed for a purpose. And look, this is the sort of case where I can bet the defense wishes nobody was watching, because with the public watching and with everybody hating this woman and really, really feeling for these kids that were just, the circumstances of their deaths, so gruesome, we want our pound of flesh, right? So we're looking to the justice system to give us our pound of flesh because we're entitled to it. We pay for the criminal justice system to do justice on behalf of us. This isn't a private lawsuit. This is the people versus the defendant, and we are the people. So when the public is paying attention and the defense doesn't think it's to their advantage, that's what they're going to say. Things like, "Stop watching. This is no big deal. Go shop at Target," whatever. But we see the opposite as well. The defense couldn't have dragged more bodies to the O.J. Simpson trial, and that had an enormous effect on the integrity of the outcome. So using the public or not is just part of the game. And it's unfortunate because sometimes I think you end up with the wrong result. Mobs at the gates should not produce an unjust acquittal, but neither should mobs at the gates produce an unjust guilty verdict. And I think the defense probably feels that those mobs at the gates are not working to their advantage at this point.
Linda Feldman here writes, "Does anyone know how Lori looked while the horrific testimony was being given about the actual killings of her children? Did she even react?" I've been following the courtroom reporters, and there were moments yesterday, I know, where she appeared to be crying, but for the most part has just been taking notes and looking down. Tara, to you, I don't know if you wanted to add anything, because I saw you react a little bit to the things that he saw in movies from Jim Thomas. So feel free to react to that. But we didn't really know the cause of death till this trial. We just found out yesterday that JJ was asphyxiated. And just even if that wasn't horrible enough to make matters worse, I know a lot of members of STS Nation are now wishing, because Lori was known to medicate him and keep him drugged a little bit, hoping that he wasn't fully conscious when he was asphyxiated. But the obvious question, and I'm sure your answer is equally obvious, what is the impact on a jury pool when they see, when the jurors hear that he was essentially choked to death?
Oh, it's horrific. I don't think you can be a human being and sit on that jury and not just be shocked by the horror of a child's life being taken, by asphyxiation, the bag over his head that was duct taped, around his neck, the fact that his feet were bound and his hands were bound. It's all just so terrible. And then, you know, there was some evidence too that there may have been a struggle, that he may have fought back. There was a bruising under his fingernail. There was a scratch mark on his neck. I mean, you know, that is just really hard to hear, I think, for anyone, including those jurors. I think, you know, and I know I've said it before, but something happens to people when they sit on a jury. I mean, they really take seriously. They can be, you know, shocked by these details, and they certainly, I'm sure, are. I mean, I think there was one juror who was crying during portions of the testimony where photographs were being admitted and shown. But they take their jobs very seriously. I mean, they really transform at the point in time when they go back for deliberations after a judge hands them the instructions. They are pretty diligent, in my experience, of going through and making sure that all of those elements are being hit. And especially in this case, it sounded like yesterday and today, these jurors were taking a lot of notes during the testimony as some of these experts were testifying. So regarding the autopsy, there was an expert from the FBI who was talking about potential tools that were used. So, you know, I think they're being very diligent here. As far as, you know, the comment that was made about, I'm just doing things that I've seen in the movies. I mean, it's in such poor taste. And if it was meant as a, you know, moment of levity, I mean, I think it was so just misplaced and inappropriate. And especially in light of some of the horrific things this jury is hearing, I don't know that would have been appreciated.
Agreed. And Adam Bluefire here writes, juries don't take grisly details of children deaths lightly, as none of us do. The fact Lori was frolicking on the beach without a care in the world during this period is damning enough in itself. Back to this phone call, which I think is pivotal, a pivotal moment in the testimony between Summer, the sister, and Lori. Dr. John Delatorre, to you, Summer is now basically screaming and crying on this call and says to Lori, there is nothing okay about killing children, nothing. And even if you didn't kill them, and Alex didn't kill them, and Chad didn't kill them, you threw them away like garbage in a pet cemetery. What's interesting to me about that is she sort of gives her the benefit of the doubt there, if you didn't kill them. Do you think these family members in their heart of hearts believe she was involved, or they simply don't know? And what's it like to negotiate that in real time?
Then or now? So then I think what they're trying to do is go through a stage of denial in which they cannot believe that this woman that essentially they've grown up with would be capable of engaging in such a horrendous act, particularly because as a family, they've all come together and said, hey, we would have taken the kids. We understand that there are things that are going on in your life that perhaps is not suitable to children, so we'll take them on. So they don't want to believe that she was capable of anything that they're in their imagination has happened to these two children, particularly once the children are found. Now, I think now they're recognizing that you cannot break someone's delusional thinking. And I'm not saying that she has a delusional disorder. I'm not making comments about what she believes or what she doesn't believe. What I'm saying is that there is a fixed false belief that she had about the world around her. And there's no way in which just a regular person can break that, even a family member, even children. There's no way that that can actually be broken to a degree where reality would set in and that the person would recognize the error in their ways. That's not going to happen. That's for a professional to do. And so that's why you'll see them attacking her, right? Even Colby Ryan was kind of going after her a little bit in his phone conversations, going after her and say, hey, you got to tell us the truth. And she's just kind of laughing it off. And she's just kind of like, haha, you know, I didn't do this, or, you know, I'm sorry you feel that way. That's someone that's they're never going to see the world the way you want them to see it. And I think they were so desperate to try to get there, to try to get an answer. They didn't recognize who they were dealing with. Now, during this trial, I think that fog has cleared.
And to the law professor, who actually committed the crimes, murders? Though, was it Alex as Lori's henchman doing her dirty work, or did she physically have a direct hand in these murders, or was she solely director of them? What is Wendy? What is the burden for conspiracy here? Because your initial comments kind of make me seem like the state is not proving their case right now beyond a reasonable doubt.
Well, for conspiracy, you have to show there's an agreement. You don't have to show exactly who she agreed with, but there has to be an agreement to do the act. And then there have to be overt acts in furtherance of the conspiracy. That's really hard to prove unless you have evidence of them communicating, which sometimes cops get, right? They do wiretaps or they have rats who tell on them or whatever, but they don't have that in this case. They say this is a conspiracy because they have two people who seemingly were hiding information and lying. And that's probably enough to charge. I don't think it's enough to convict. But will the jury wonder? Because that question is so important. What you just got as a question is so important. It's really what the jury's going to be asking. Who did it and why? Did Lori do it herself? Did she hire someone? It's possible she hired someone, but there's no evidence of that. Is it possible someone else killed them and she buried them? Yes. Is it possible someone else killed them and buried them? Yes. Why did JJ have rape drugs in his body? What the hell is that? Where does that come from? Are they suggesting that Lori was also raping him, making porn with him? I mean, the jury has to make sense of this stuff. They can't just hear the evidence in isolation. They have to see the picture that makes sense. It has to resonate with their internal narrative where they go, oh yeah, that makes sense over here. That makes sense over here. And I can come to this conclusion that feels comfortable with how I see the world. I don't see them going there because nothing about this case comes together like that. It's not that it couldn't. I mean, if the prosecution had the evidence, then as uncomfortable as it might be, the jury would be compelled to see it, even if it hurts their feelings to see it, because they're not going to want to think a mother could do such a thing. But I'm not aware of any proof that she did it. She hired someone to do it. She did it with someone. There was a particular agreement, the overt act in furtherance of the killing. I just don't see it.
Very, very interesting. I haven't heard someone this straightforward about this until Wendy Murphy, who she's a no holds barred kind of woman. She speaks the truth. So it's going to be interesting. Now I'm getting more curious to see what could come when this verdict is ultimately delivered. Catherine, back to you, Wendy, real quickly here, because this goes back to the earlier discussion we had, and both you and Dave were very open about believing in transparency. And Catherine says, but on the other hand, what about media, us, making a zoo of the trial with a broadcast so it makes it impossible to find any jurors for a fair trial, for a retrial, or related trials? What's your response to that?
Well, that's about pre-trial publicity, not trial publicity, right? So absolutely you want to protect the integrity of the ultimate decision by not fomenting a revolution in the streets before trial happens. I agree with that 100%. That's the worst thing you could do. And, it cuts both ways. You can, because there's too much public attention, make it impossible for the prosecution to win a case they deserve to win and impossible for a defendant to prevail in a case he deserves to win. And that's not what our Constitution guarantees. So insulating against that is important. But the idea that there's a camera in the courtroom for the trial, which is after all of that other stuff would have happened, right? So you already have your jurors. Then that risk goes down dramatically. And I still stand by my view, which is that there's no downside. Now, there could be a downside, and every case stands on its own, and you have to make the arguments. If you're a defense attorney and you say, look, if we air what we're about to talk about in this case, there's going to be World War III, or somebody's going to die. Like, let's say some of the witnesses are confidential informants and, they're going to end up dead. Those are compelling enough reasons to not have cameras in the courtroom. But the presumption should be cameras in, audio and video. The public has a right to be there. The more, the merrier. And we all get to hold our government accountable for doing things wrong, if they're doing things wrong. It's so hard for the public to feel confidence in a verdict when they don't have a sense that things worked the way they were supposed to. And so you end up with people becoming cynical. Like, I don't respect the law. I don't respect judges, because they don't have enough access to be able to learn and incorporate feelings about the process, respecting things like procedural due process, what everyone calls technicalities. They're not. But if the process is unfair and the prosecutor ends up having evidence suppressed, for example, which makes the trial less provable, which some people might think is terribly unfair, but if you respect the concept of due process, then you think it is fair. You got to learn. You have to learn why that is part of what we respect and want to vote. But without giving the public a lot of access, they're never, unless you're a law student or a lawyer, you're never going to put those things together. So shining a light, making more information available, helping the public really understand what can be very complex stuff. In a case like this too, where there's just so much evidence and it's complicated and confusing and crazy, you want as much, public access as possible, because this verdict is going to make people upset one way or the other. At least they can have confidence in how it happened, how we got there.
And I think Tara's having flashbacks to law school right now. So, Tara, there's a comment from Sarah, I think, about the defense team here. And she says, I think that blaming others is the only strategy they have. Do you agree with that? I mean, what could the defense possibly do here?
I mean, the defense can just point out where those connections aren't, right? And so it goes to Wendy's point on the conspiracy. It's a conspiracy, right? So at some point in time, they have to show what the connection is to Lori. What did she do in the midst of all this? How was she part of this, this idea to murder? How are they going to tie it back? Now, I think the evidence today that came in included a fingerprint of Alex Cox that was on at least some of the plastic bags. And I think it was a plastic bag for that JJ's body was in. And so there's a chink there, but they're still going to have to tie it back to Lori. How was she a part of this conspiracy? I think that there's a lot of circumstantial evidence here. I as a former prosecutor, I know it's a high bar for prosecutors to convince beyond a reasonable doubt. I think that if the defense is really good at their job, what they're going to do is they're going to hammer the fact that this is circumstantial and that they have no direct evidence at all that Lori directed anyone to murder these children. Now, personally, I still think that there may be enough here where she's going to be found guilty, but who knows what a jury's going to do.
And the members of STS Nation are pointing out that Casey Anthony had no conspiracy charge, and they believe, according to what I'm reading here, that conspiracy will prevail. But Dr. John De La Torre, Barbara Kay writes, speaking about Lori, she has a talent, in quotes, for charming people, law enforcement, family, ex-husbands, 5 or 4 and current, I guess, men, even women, into believing her. Is that smart? Maybe, but she uses it all for her own benefit. I mean, you've had some time. I know you don't know her, and I know psychologists don't necessarily diagnose people that they don't see, but I mean, how do you describe her, her personality, her character? What kind of person is Lori Vallow?
Problematic, right? That's who she is. She's problematic. She's problematic because is it possible that she only uses it for her own benefit? Sure. But my argument is that any talent that any of us have, we only use for our own benefit. So that's not really telling me anything. What I'm saying is that, is it possible that in her mind, she was doing everything that she knew to do that was right in her head and didn't care or didn't matter to her that people were getting hurt? Yeah, that's absolutely possible. Would she do things that a rational person might say is covering up, right? Or trying to pass the buck on someone else? Yeah, absolutely. But again, she's trying to live a life that we don't understand, right? We don't get it. And so trying to apply our own internal logic to someone that we have no idea what's actually going on inside of our head is a losing battle. So that's what makes her problematic. And so is it possible she's evil? Sure, but to me, that's too reductive. She's a complicated and problematic individual who engaged in some behaviors that she shouldn't have engaged in. Is that murder? I mean, maybe. The evidence that I'm seeing is certainly circumstantial to suggest that she knew that this thing was going to happen. But at the end of the day, she's still human, right? She's not a monster. I'm not going to imbue her with any supernatural power. She's a human being who did things that if we take the time to understand and take the time to listen to her, then maybe we can get a better insight into why she did the things that she did.
What about Chad? Same take?
Yeah, I think I think she charmed him. I mean, I think he easily wanted to be charmed, right? That if he didn't want to be involved with her, he wasn't going to be involved with her. So I think he wanted it. And I think that there were things that she probably did that initially he probably didn't necessarily agree with, but because they were already so in line with some of the more out there kinds of thoughts, he was willing to engage in it. So is he as problematic? I don't know that he's as problematic, but he's certainly someone that is willing to push things further. I think he's willing to push things past the envelope. And luckily had, or unluckily in the case of the victims here, was with someone who was willing to engage in the same kinds of thoughts and same kinds of behaviors.
Eileen writes, Tara, might be a silly question, but is there a minimum time the jury has to deliberate? Keep in mind, Alec Murdaugh, the jury deliberated for, I think it was 2 hours and 45 minutes, but basically said their minds were made up almost immediately. What is the answer to this, Tara?
No. No, there's no time in statute or rule that says you've got to be in there for at least half an hour or 45 minutes or, 15 minutes. No, but what the jury has to do is the jury has to go back and normally what they get is a packet of the jury instructions. And then they are going to go through all of the evidence. And however they decide to do this, they're going to have a discussion about it. That takes time. And so, and they're also going to have to go through the verdict form and start filling out the verdict form after that discussion concludes. So, it might be a quick verdict. They might go in and have a very, simple discussion. They might compare notes a little bit. It could be a fast verdict for either side, but no minimum time.
And Wendy, I know there was something you wanted to share outside of this, so let's take a 30-second detour. I don't know what it is. Steve Cohen told me there was something that you wanted to bring up, and the floor is yours. Oh, except I have you muted, so hang on 1 second. Go ahead.
I just want to say thank you for taking the time. It's unrelated, but so important. And it happened today in Washington, D.C. It happened yesterday as well. And it involves the Equal Rights Amendment. For people who don't know, women in America are not yet equal under the Constitution. We were excluded from the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause when that was adopted in 1868. And we've been fighting ever since for basic equality. There was some activity this week in Congress to try to validate the Equal Rights Amendment, which was ratified by the requisite number of states in January of 2020. At that time, the Trump administration blocked it from being added to the Constitution. A lot of people voted for Biden thinking he would unblock it. He did not. Biden blocked the Equal Rights Amendment and fought against women's equality in 2 federal lawsuits, including one that I filed in Massachusetts federal court. And the Biden administration made the same arguments against women's equality that the Trump administration made. So the lawsuit that I filed went from 2020 to 2022. So I had both administrations fighting against me, making exactly the same arguments. And I just wanted to take advantage of the moment to say the Democrats would like women in America to think that they support women's equality. They don't, because the chief Democrat is currently blocking the Equal Rights Amendment, and again was hostile in my lawsuit and in another federal lawsuit in DC during the same time period. I am not suggesting the Republicans do support women's equality. They don't. They just admit that they dislike women. The Democrats lie about it. So I appreciate letting me say that out loud. There aren't a lot of nonpartisan news outlets that will let me say this about the Democrats because it's not allowed. But the reality is women need to fight in a nonpartisan manner for basic equal protection of the laws. 5 women a day, more than 5 women a day, are killed by men in America because we don't yet have equal protection of the laws. And that needs to change. We've been fighting for over 100 years. I think we're going to have to rise up and form our own new National Women's Party to get the job done. But thank you so much for letting me have a moment to say that.
And before you guys start sending hate mail about politics left and right, that's not what Wendy is saying. Wendy, if you don't know Wendy, she's one of the leading women's rights advocates in the nation. She's a scholar. She studies that and domestic violence. And I wanted to give her the time to express herself because she came on here. And she is a very, very intelligent woman trying to get good things done. So glad that she had that moment. Back to Tara here from Beth. Can it be better for the defense lawyer to show an empty hand instead of a bad hand in defense? And I guess most people think the only thing they could come up with right now would be a bad hand. And Wendy, we're going to keep going, and I want you to stay, but if you have to run, I get it, because I think you thought we were going an hour. So totally your call.
Empty hand versus bad hand. I mean, you don't want to put it on a defense that it just screams it's, incredible. I think, this jury is going to be watching and has been watching everything that both sides are doing. There is a danger in taking kind of the shotgun approach. Now, that being said, what they could do is come in and point to other possibilities of people who engaged in this conduct, directed it, and by pointing to other possibilities, they create reasonable doubt, which means that the state hasn't met, or they can argue the state hasn't met its burden of proof there. The empty hand, I think what people have to realize is that the burden is on it's on the state. It's not on the defense. The defense doesn't have to put on any evidence at all. The state has the entire burden of proof here to show beyond a reasonable doubt that she's guilty. And so if Lori doesn't take the stand, there's actually a specific instruction that you are not, as a juror, supposed to read anything into the fact that the defendant is, maintaining her rights and not speaking and taking the witness stand here. So, I think that's going to be at the forefront of these jurors' minds, because that'll be in the instructions that they're given by the court.
And Dr. John Delatorre, Christina writes, why can't Lori be viewed as damaged, very damaged human being who never connected with another human in a healthy manner, and in this brokenness operates like a wild animal without empathy? Although I think my boxer Ethel has some empathy. But Dr. John Delatorre, is she on the mark or off the mark with this comment?
I think it depends on who you're asking. If you're asking me, I think that's perfectly plausible way to evaluate Lori. If you're asking the lawyers, they're going to say that's character evidence that can't come into the trial. So I think however you want to perceive her is totally up to you, and you can perceive her and be valid in your perception of who she is. When I describe her, I think my problem has always been that individuals tend to imbue her and calling her a monster and calling her a demon and calling her all this, that, and the other thing, simply because of what she believes in and what she's been alleged to have done. And my problem with that is that it's too reductive. She's a human being that I think we need to spend more time trying to learn why she did what she did. Why does she believe what she believed? But that doesn't excuse, right? That doesn't condone her behaviors at all. And I don't use psychology to justify anybody's bad behaviors. I don't use it to justify anybody's criminal acts. My job is to understand and to explain. And so I try to spend more time thinking about why someone would engage in this act rather than kind of surface level characterological issues.
Wendy, this is kind of an interesting question being posed here. If Lori truly believed her children were zombies, has she still committed murder in the first degree?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it kind of relates to what we were just hearing. You can assert as a defense in most states. How it's framed is different. It's not always an affirmative defense, but it's always an option to be able to defend yourself, whatever you're charged with, by saying, yes, I did it, but I lacked the capacity, either because I had some kind of mental problem or I was drugged or drunk. I didn't have the capacity to form the criminal intent to do the act. Every state allows something like that to be argued the benefits and burdens of doing it, and whether you end up with a not guilty or just a lesser verdict, you know, you're guilty of something lesser, depends on the state. But it's interesting because the fact that she would use the word zombie to describe her children makes me think, as a mom of 5, well, wait, I've called my children much worse than zombie. And if anybody used my words against my children, and, you know, in some case like this, man, I'd be guilty in a heartbeat, because the words I use, if that's all you're going to use against me, you'd hate me. I'm sure, you know, I'm sure other moms, if they were being honest, would say the same thing. But so you can't judge a person based on such things. Also, who knows? I don't really know the context of her saying my kids are zombies. I don't know what she meant. Does it mean she has a mental problem? Maybe. You know, do people who have very extreme religious beliefs have mental problems? Is she one of those? Anything else? The fact remains, you can think your children are, you know, animals from a farm, and that doesn't prove you did anything to them. And even if you say, I believe my children are zombies and zombies should be killed, that's some evidence of your state of mind and perhaps motive or intent, but it's not proof that you follow through. And it really isn't much by way of compelling evidence that a person.
Well, and there goes Wendy's audio, and her. I think she just froze up there. So, and there she goes. Sarah writes, I wish the CEO / chief marketing officer / chief technical officer would come on here. I'd love to see her with Carm, please. That would be the wife. I just had a great idea. Number one, I'm always posting pictures of the family on Instagram at Surviving the Survivor, so check that out. But maybe we'll get her on here for a Patreon session. How about that? So maybe we'll work on that. I'll have to pay her, of course, but that's okay. Nikki Cube writes, and we'll wrap it up in a moment or two here. To you, Tara Malik, if Lori gets convicted, will that influence Chad's trial? Can the prosecution use this to show that Chad is also guilty? Could this cause trouble for the second trial, finding jurors, the media, etc.? And Wendy is back. Tara.
Well, Chad has to have a separate trial. So due process requires that that Chad be convicted if he's going to be convicted on evidence against him. So the state has to be very careful about this other trial right now. These trials were separated. The reason why they were separated was because Lori was not willing to waive her right to a speedy trial. And so, and Chad was. And so it had to be accelerated, and the state had to be prepared to put it on right now. But Chad has to be convicted based on evidence against him as part of this conspiracy charge. And so, you know, again, it goes down to due process here.
And Dr. John Delatorre, this is an interesting question here from Adam Bluefire. What did Lori and Chad's cult members get out of being a part of their inner circle exactly? Do you think there's a lot more to the story than they are telling us? Many people point out that Chad is not your typical cult leader. He's kind of drab, boring, not overly charismatic. So what do you think was happening here? Were they gaining something? Are there just a lot of people in the world that are looking for human connection, and maybe this was their kind of twisted way of getting it?
Yeah. I mean, it's as simple as that. No one wants to feel alone. No one wants to feel isolated. No one wants to have these feelings. And so some people are of such a mindset that even being connected to people that they know don't believe the way that they do, or that they engage in beliefs that are much more extreme than the beliefs that they hold. Even being connected to those people is better than being connected to no one, than to be isolated. And so what are they getting out of it? It is human connection. Do I think that there's more to the story than they're telling us? Yeah, absolutely. There's always more to the story than we're being told. None of us were a part of this cult. And even if we were only getting the pieces of information that Chad and Lori told us that we could be getting, right? And that's how you keep people in line, is that you silo the information so that the only thing that they are aware of are the things that keep them in line. And it doesn't, yeah, he's not like David Koresh, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't understand people, right? Charisma isn't just about, being able to get on the mic and tell a few jokes. It's also about understanding and interacting with the individual that you're in front of right now. And it's certainly possible that one-on-one, Chad and Lori are able to convince you into believing on their side to the detriment of your own beliefs. So they're getting human connection, and there's way more to the story than we know.
And Wendy, then we'll wrap it up in a moment. Another interesting question here. Who do you believe is more guilty, the orchestrator of a murder or the perpetrator who commits the actual acts of the murder, or equal guilt, Wendy?
Absolutely equal, 100%. Now, every case is different, and you might persuade me in one case where it's a hired hit, for example, that the one who did the hiring is more guilty than the killer, because the killer only accepted the job out of desperation because he needed money to pay for his kid's operation, right? Something like that. You could have a moral dilemma that forces you to think one or the other is more morally or legally guilty, but under the law, they're equally guilty. It really doesn't matter if you're the getaway driver in a robbery or the one who goes in and does the robbery. And that's the way the law should be, and that's the way the law is. But I think one of the most important themes of this case for me, and I hope it's a takeaway that everybody can appreciate, because I usually argue for the prosecution. Not that I want to, it's that most prosecutions are legitimate, and 95% of cases that are filed, the people are guilty. So when I tend to favor the prosecution, it's because the odds are on my side. It's not that I'm a former prosecutor. If I think that evidence isn't there, I'm going to say it isn't there. And for me, one of the themes that's disturbing about this case, and this is from the defense perspective, and I don't do defense work normally, sometimes, but rare, is that this desire to find her guilty because we dislike her, because we find her weird, because she talked about zombies and she's in a weird religion. Those are antithetical to the Constitution. You want the most despicable human being who we hate deeply to have the fairest trial possible. That's what democracy is. That's what our Constitution promises, and we should all be proud to support. Now, I'm not saying whether she's guilty or not. I'm saying there's this just inclination to think she's guilty without stepping back and saying, well, let's strip away how she spoke or how she danced in Hawaii. Where's the evidence? Let's just look at the evidence and pretend for a minute that we don't really care that she's a bad character with a mental problem. Are you comfortable finding this woman guilty when there's absolutely no evidence she killed anybody or hired someone to kill someone? Now, you may have good reason to suspect that she did, but there's no actual evidence that she did any of those things. And it's certainly possible. It's possible that someone else killed the children because they wanted to get back at her for something. That's a story that could be just as likely as she killed them because she thought they were zombies. In fact, it's probably more likely that someone else killed them, because if she did kill them, she's damn good at covering it up. I mean, that's the other thing I would argue to the jury. If she's the killer here, do you think she's so damn sophisticated, like the mafia, that she managed to keep her fingerprints in every possible type of evidence there might be connecting her to this, that she would be able to prevent all that? So what is she? Is she mentally ill, or is she the super sophisticated co-conspirator? You can't be both. And I think that, it's hard to be objective when you have strong emotions, and children dying is the strongest emotion I can experience. In a case like this, I want someone to pay, but I don't want the wrong person to pay. And I think everyone should feel that, even if it takes extra effort to get there, because we just want to wring her neck for being so friggin' weird.
Right now, Lori is like, oh, crap, I should have hired Wendy Murphy. Instead, I'm stuck with Jim Archibald. Hey, if I ever get in trouble, I know who to call, Wendy. If you have problems, you can call Dr. John Delatorre, who's a PsyD, a licensed psychologist in Texas, Arizona, and New York State. He's also a psychological analyst for television news and court shows like STS now, and he's a certified clinical traumatologist. I like this comment, Dr. John, and we'll get your closing thoughts. Stephanie says, Chad is just a doofus to me. I really don't get it. And followed here by Jen Till. Lori responded to some stuff earlier. What about me? What about that she would say, what about me? It was in regards to how she was feeling. I don't know if Wendy Murphy's right and she didn't kill these kids. Maybe she's asking a legitimate question, or is she a narcissist here?
Yes, both things are true. She is asking a legitimate question and she is a narcissist.
Any final thoughts on where we're headed here?
You know what? I see it unfolding like this. Well, hopefully, I see it unfolding like this. Chad ends up getting on the stand, and Lori has a complete meltdown, and we get to see the fireworks of a case like this, and it becomes just drama and theatrical. But the reality is that the walls are closing in on Lori, and the end is nigh for her.
And the end is near for Wendy Murphy too, whose connection keeps going out, and we just lost her again. Right here, KJH Mining. Tara is my favorite guest. No offense, Delatorre and Dave Aronberg and Wendy, and one of our best attorneys here in Idaho. She is a Boise, Idaho licensed attorney. She's also been a prosecutor. She has experience in both civil and criminal law, and she is a bright legal mind. Your final thoughts here, Tara?
Well, I'm fascinated to see what the defense ends up doing in the next couple of days, and how they punch some holes into the evidence that's been presented during their closing arguments. So I'm sure there's going to be many more little twists and turns before we're done.
And Wendy Murphy, she is a fierce fighter for women's rights and against domestic violence. She teaches at New England Law in Boston. She was a visiting scholar at Harvard Law School. She's been all over the telly. And by the way, shout out to Denmark, Australia, and Israel. A lot of people watching from those three countries tonight. So shout out to our Danish friends. Wendy, any final thoughts here? You brought up some really interesting points. I have a feeling I'm going to get hate mail because people don't want to hear that Lori may not be found guilty. But right now you are sticking strong with your contention that the state is not really necessarily connecting the dots, if I understand you correctly.
Well, you know, I don't say it lightly because I have the same emotions other people have. But hate mail is fine. I just hope it comes to me, not you, because you didn't say it. I think for me, because I've been a lawyer for so long and I've been, I've handled so many of these kinds of cases, that if I can't make sense of the story, if I can't create a narrative that is coherent in my mind and in my soul, my gut, in my sense of how the world works, including all the bad things that happen in the world, if I can't create a coherent narrative, I'm going to be inclined to push back. I'm going to be inclined to vote not guilty, just because that's how I feel as a human being, that I should judge these cases, right? If I can't make sense of it, and I can't make sense of this case. I mean, to be perfectly blunt, the prosecution's theory and the story that they've put forth just doesn't jibe with me. I know everyone agrees there's more to the story, but the danger there, if you're the prosecutor, is that kind of missing part that would give everybody in the jury the sense that this is the right thing to do. I think what's missing for them is meaningful. And that's why I think there's going to be a not guilty. It's not that I think she's not guilty. It's that the story isn't coherent. It makes no sense. And if it doesn't make sense, that's a not guilty.
Wow. Well, if it is in fact a not guilty, we will definitely have you back. We'll have you back either way, but really interesting perspective. Again, I think STS Nation is going to be upset to hear that. So as Wendy said, send your hate mail to her, not me, but you can send me your comments. And it's okay for us to all agree to disagree. And Wendy's not saying she likes this woman or thinks anything she has done is above board. She's just strictly talking about the law, and that is why she was a visiting scholar at Harvard. A quick programming note: tomorrow, 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time, we've got Detective Phil Waters and Scott Duffy. Great Scott, it's your True Crime Phil at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and we are going to discuss the Bryan Kohberger case, and we had Wendy on for Brian Walsh, which there was news with today, so we're going to discuss that as well tomorrow. Apparently, she was having an affair. He hired a private investigator, and we'll get into the nitty-gritty of that mañana. Until then, love you, America. Love you, San Antonio. Love you, Boise. Love you, Boston. Love you, Denmark, Israel, and Australia.